Alright, time for another draftphysics.com, debatephysics.com, also video presentation. Alright, a channel sort of devoted to this argument between reasonable, grounded science and rather perverse, crazy, wooey nonsense science. And clearly the nonsensiers are winning, and I think that's it's just wrong, okay, because it's wrong. And it's also wrong because it just perverts everybody's understanding of what is going on here in this universe and what hope there is for any role for the human race to play that isn't just sadistic, meat grinding nonsense. But anyway, so there's still another comment. So it's polite enough, so we'll respond to it and just make clear what I thought I had already made clear lots of times. Even the idea of saying PushAverse, I mean, I'm making it clear that the universe just runs on motion, and the motion has to be conserved, and that's all there really is. And the motion is made out of two components, the thing moving and the mass of the thing moving, momentum. So it's a momentum verse. Doesn't sound quite as good, so I like push. But anyway, that's the way it's going to be. Alright, so comment. Comment. There it is. Alright. So he says, yeah, thank you for the reply. I won't go through all the things you said. Sort of important, actually, but whatever. But I think this is the most important thing. Yeah, I probably disagree. You agree that momentum equals force times time. No, I really agree that momentum equals force. And it only equals time when it's a constant force. So yes, when applied to gravity, or I suppose you could apply it to something like a tidal force. But see, that gradually gets higher and higher over time. But the force of it probably doesn't. Well, it's a volume of water, and the volume increases. So, and wind, yeah, sometimes you have a 30-mile-an-hour wind, but that's sort of an average. So you could almost call it a constant force. But it has to be a constant force. So who cares about stuff that needs a constant force? So what I'm clearly saying is momentum is force, just like Newton said, frankly, when he said twice the force, twice the motion, velocity. 3 times the force, 3 times the velocity. He's clearly just saying momentum and force are the same thing. If you launch a light object and a heavy object with the same spring compression, the force will be the same. So it won't. I mean, in the sense that the total force will be the same, but the force that you can get into the object won't be the same for the reasons I already outlined, not the reasons you're going to say. But the time will be shorter for the light object. Yeah, but it's not necessarily proportional to the fact of why you can't oblige the spring to move faster than it can move, and it's going to always leave some energy left in the spring. So the lighter the object, the faster the spring's moving when the object leaves, and so the spring is left with more energy left in it. But clearly the spring, if I compress the spring with 2 pounds, when the spring's uncompressing, then it's only pushing with 1 pound. So the force the spring pushes with is not constant. Alright. Thus, the light object will gain less momentum with the same spring energy. So, no, it's going to gain less momentum because the spring can't get all of its energy into it because it can't move fast enough to push things fast with all of the spring's energy. Where the slower the thing is moving, the more of the spring's energy goes into the object because the spring has less energy left over when the object finally leaves the spring. So when the object leaves the spring is barely moving if the object's barely moving. And therefore the spring has put more energy into the object. Do you have any counter arguments? Yeah, I just made them. Alright, it is the same for combustion engines. So I don't even know why somebody would go into combustion engines. But the tiny differences there are between running the engine fast and running the engine slow and all of that crap has nothing to do with this kinetic energy theory. It's not changing the fact that your theory says explicitly 25 times the fuel to go 5 times as fast, where the momentum theory says, no, it's only 5 times the fuel to go 5 times as fast. Now, obviously, I'm going to argue it's 4.3 times the fuel to go 5 times as fast because the engine gets a little more efficient. But that's it. You're not going to change. You're not going to be able to defend your theory with this argument. It's just bogus to even bring it up. Again, all the complications that exist with combustion engines. Come on, there's a huge amount of heat loss, a huge amount of, you have to add in all that crap. But the general fact is that we all know from personal experience, okay, that engines don't require 25 times the gas to go 5 times as fast. The faster the engine spins, the less momentum is gained with the same amount of fuel, says you, because the shorter time the force is applied. So it's just nonsense. Obviously, the force is being applied in greater amounts. You're increasing the amount of fuel that you're putting in the cylinder. So, I mean, quite obviously, more fuel ends up with more compression, which means more velocity. It's not because of some mechanical problem that it can't give you more velocity. So we know the fuel is what's regulating the speed of the engine. This is the same for everything. Faster things are harder to accelerate. So more nonsense. They only require more acceleration, period. You have to spread more peanut butter on a bigger piece of bread to have the same thickness of peanut butter. I mean, it is that simple, and you're trying to make it complicated just to evade the subject. I think this is pretty intuitive, but that's just my opinion. Well, again, I'm just my opinion. You have to back it up with some kind of really, relevant solution to a problem. I presented you the problem. With all of our land on the moon technology, we can't collect more than 0.06% of the kinetic energy, okay, of a bullet. So show me, all right, you being able to collect this thing you say exists. You say this special energy exists, and there's every appearance that there's absolutely no way to collect it. A spaceship can't collect it. A ballistic pendulum can't collect it. So where are you collecting it somewhere? And obviously the point being made is you have to fuel it also. So I can just make the argument that show me it taking 25 times the energy to spin anything 5 times as fast. Show me the electric drill, and show me when you pull the trigger how your wattage, the amount of watts you have to use to spin it exponentially, quadratically grows. Because it doesn't. All right. So, if you agree that momentum equals force, it doesn't equal force times time. All right, only when you're talking about a constant force. So force times time is when you're applying it to gravity. But there aren't too many constant forces besides gravity. Then you must agree that equal momentum does not equal spring compression. So on the compressing part, that isn't a problem. All the energy goes into the spring really easy. Okay, that's not a problem. It's the getting out that's the problem. So the spring works very good at collecting the energy. It's not so good at giving it back at different speeds. So equal momentum does not mean equal work. So again, work is a useless word. Really doesn't mean anything. So unless you count heat as work, what's the point of using the word work? That just means, the part we want, the part we like. The movement we like we'll call work. The movement we don't like, the heat, we'll call something else. That's just a nonsense. So I don't even like the word work. But if you're going to use it, I say allow heat to be work. And then it's the same thing as saying force equals momentum equals work equals pressure equals heat equals everything. They all equal the same thing. They're all motion in the universe, and it's just about mass and velocity. All right, so he says means equal work / momentum is not energy. Says you, again. Kinetic energy is a fable. You have zero frickin' evidence that this crap is real. Okay, so show me some hard, good evidence of you collecting kinetic energy. Because there is none. And again, the rocket thing is just so obvious, and the ballistic pendulum is so obvious, and then the fact that I could mention levers are so obvious. A gravity balance proves the point, okay, because it doesn't show any evidence that it knows what a kinetic energy is. All right, so I guess I got to add some crap by drawing some crap. So I guess that's what I'll do. All right, back. Okay, so force equals energy equals heat equals pressure equals weight. These are all the same thing. Thrust you could also add on there. Okay, so it doesn't matter. They're all motion in the universe, and they all have to do with, the only thing that's going to matter is how big the mass is, okay, and what's its velocity. That's it. Everything is just those two things combined. You can have something that has a big mass and a small velocity equals a big velocity and a small mass. It's really that elemental and that simple. Photons have momentum, okay? They're not massless. That's just an invented concept. There's no factual evidence that demonstrates a photon to have no mass. They just made it up to fit the relativity theory. So it's just a nonsense. They have a real mass, okay, very small, but it's real, and they have a velocity, and that's their momentum. And you know, it's always the same amount of force. You can quantize it, okay? It's all obedient to a Planck concept that the universe is made out of this constituent stuff, and that's the truth of it. So I would argue that the force is to be legitimately understood. Force is the stuff that causes everything. So that's the little bits in the universe that are going the speed of light, okay? And then you just have the matter bits, which are just elementally just electrons and protons, essentially, and that's all there really is. And the fact is they haven't weighed these things properly because they used mv squared to measure the weight of an electron. So you have to understand this is the formula they used, okay? And so if this is incorrect, obviously this mass is going to be incorrect. But anyway, it doesn't really matter because, yes, the atomic weight isn't your actual weight, which they should figure out is a problem. Your constituent parts should be able to add up to your total weight. And obviously, if it doesn't add up to your total weight, then you're missing something, clearly. So we can go through all these different experiments, okay? The simple 5 mass, okay? And then we make it into a 10 mass by just dropping another 5 mass on it, all right? And it has a velocity of 10, all right? And that's going to equal, okay, a 10 mass going 5, all right? And you're going to lose 1/2 the kinetic energy is gone. 1/2, okay, gone. 1/2 the KE, all right? And there's nothing in here to show where it went because it has to go somewhere. So if you believe in conservation, you have to explain where the little particles flew away in some other direction, what got really hot, what vibrated. And even vibrations, you have to understand that something can vibrate a very large distance, okay, at a high speed, and then something can vibrate the same exact frequency by just going less distance. So these two things can have the same frequency, but they're obviously not made out of the same energy. So you can't just use frequency and say anything at a frequency is this amount of energy, because the frequency can have a different amount of amplitude, okay, built into it, a different amount of momentum. So again, an elephant vibrating versus a mouse vibrating on a pendulum is going to make a difference when it hits you. Brother. A big difference. A very large difference. All right, so then we can just do the velocity thing on a straight path where you're going to take the energy. I mean, I hate to even say it, but I mean, do I really have to explain to people, that the ground is taking the energy? So we give it velocity, and now we're going to take the velocity by allowing it to roll on a surface, and the surface is going to consume the energy. And the simple argument is do you really think it doesn't matter how fast it's going? The ground is going to consume the same amount of energy no matter what velocity it's traveling. And again, you know right here is where this is one velocity. So this is going one velocity, two velocity. All right, we know we got 4 times the total distance. Actually, turns out to be a little more. But anyway, and so we know this is where it's going 1v. So we know it's going half its velocity at this bizarre location, 3 units of distance. And so what's the obvious? I mean, it's obvious and it's true. It's just a fact that here very little was being taken out of the object because of the velocity. The higher the velocity, the less gravity per square inch. It's the same time here. The gravitation is a time-dependent force. It's 9.8 meters per second per 1 second. Okay, not any more than that. I mean, this says it right here. You don't even need this nonsense. It's 9.8 meters per 1 second. That's the amount of force the gravity is applying. Okay, and here's 1 unit of time, 1 unit of time. Fact, 2 total units of time in the gravity, 2 opportunities for the gravity to extract the force, 2 units of velocity. So it all adds up perfectly. And the simple truth is that yes, in these 3 units, there's the same heat, okay, here as there is here. All right, because of the fact that this is going much slower, it's being pushed per inch, it's more force on the surface, there's more opportunity, more contact, more conduction, okay, takes place. More of this energy is being converted into vibrations in the ground. The ground is being moved, it's taking the force. And the force is simply something that sticks to things. So, I mean, it was a little bit above Newton's pay grade to understand all this stuff about elemental bits inside of matter and all that stuff, but this was discussed by Newton, the fact of a particle theory. He liked the idea of it, and there were catches to it that, again, he couldn't understand because there's electrons and protons and charge and magnetism and all these other elements that are controlling how atoms are structured. But the fact is that it works, and the idea is as simple as you have an object, and the force is basically in little components. So if I hit something with something else, the fact is it has force when it's moving. When it has a velocity, it contains a force. The velocity isn't nothing, it's an actual something. The force has stuck to it, and what it's going to do is transfer that force to the other object, and now the other object's going to move because it took it away. So this could have $10, okay, and it can give $5 to this, or it can give all its money to this. This is automatically poor when this gets rich, and all you're doing is taking the elemental force that this one has captured by some encounter it had. It had an encounter with wind, or it had an encounter with gravity, or it had an encounter with some elemental force. Let's use just elemental ones, like gravity or photons or magnetism. Something caused this to move by injecting it, okay, by shooting paint force at it, and it stuck. And now it has this extra amount of bits inside of it that are going one way rather than the opposite way. It was in a force differential. It's now has motion, and it's just going to give that motion to the stuff it encounters. They're going to share their balance, and in the end, if this one has more than this, it's going to give some percentage of it to it. And that's all that's going to happen. Things are going to exchange the velocity they've acquired, and the velocity they have acquired is elementally real. It's a real substance moving the speed of light. The object doesn't move because something says it's moving. The wrench that's moving in space versus the wrench sitting in place, the 2 wrenches are different. One of them has something, and one of them doesn't have that something. And one of them's missing it. So if you could look inside the wrenches, you would see that there's a differential in the force, okay, that it's electrons and protons. You would see that there's a difference in the amount of force being exchanged between the electrons and protons, and that force differential is in a decided direction. There's more going one way than going the other ways. And it all adds up and it all works. So you have all these arguments against it. I mean, this idea of just adding a mass gracefully, you don't smash anything, you don't crash anything, there's no evidence that you've lost anything, you conserve 99%, maybe even a little higher than that. I've seen the experiments, okay, and there's lots of them. And it's a huge percentage of efficiency in terms of keeping your total momentum. So a huge percentage of the momentum is conserved, and again, half the kinetic energy just is disappeared because there is no evidence that anything got burning hot. There's no evidence that pieces flew off. There's no evidence of any of these claims of deformation or any way that the energy was dissipated. This half the kinetic energy was dissipated somewhere. Zero evidence. So just like the ballistic pendulum, it's just a claim. We claim that there's a whole bunch of energy still in the pendulum, in the clay. No evidence that it's in there. So it's just, frankly, bullshit. I mean, after all this time, again, the ballistic pendulum is just such an obvious. You're telling me with all of our technology, we can't figure out any way to collect a bullet's energy. So the bullet goes in, all right, with 2,000 joules of energy. All right. The pendulum collects 0.06%. And we conserve, essentially, let's just say the momentum is 2. We conserve 1.7. So we lose 0.3 of the momentum. And obviously that's the deformation of the clay, and a little bit of heat dissipated would account for that tiny percentage. Now, if you could get this up to 2%, okay, then you're making free momentum. But you can't. So there's just no experiment. So go ahead, show me the experiment where they collect the kinetic energy and they violate the momentum. That is, they create free momentum. Because you've almost conserved the momentum. So all you need to do is get a tiny bit more of the energy out and you'll have free momentum. So why don't you show me that experiment? Well, you can't, because it doesn't happen. It'll never happen. You'll never show it because it is just fake physics. It's just nonsense. It was never a good theory. I mean, none of you people will deal with any of the arguments. Leibniz just stated this. He didn't show this with any evidence. He just stated 4 pounds again. I mean, how many times can I say it over and over again? You can't even do this simple experiment. Your physics that spends billions of dollars on crap experiments about silly things like a black hole or some other kind of crap can't even do this simple experiment. Can't even sit there. You can do it, horizontally. You can do it in any direction, but you already know this is just twice the velocity. So one mass going twice the velocity, a 4 mass going 1 velocity. You're telling me, okay, Leibniz said to the world, these two things created the same impact force. It's the same energy. Clearly, this is only twice the time in the gravity. It only got 2 units of 9.8. I mean, that's damn frickin' obvious. Okay, that's all it got. A 9.8 up here and a 9.8 here. How can you people keep lying about what's actually happening? The velocity is exactly 19.6. I mean, how do you make up this fable that there's 4 units of energy here? That somehow in twice the time it got 4 units of gravity when it's 9.8 meters per 1 second. How? How did it do that magical feat? All right, so obviously the momentums aren't equal, okay, and that means the energy's not going to be equal. It's not going to compress the scale the same amount, okay, because it's not the same energy. This is going to compress it more, and this is going to compress it less. It's not sufficient. You need a 1 mass at 4 times the velocity, which the lever demonstrates to be the truth. The 1,000-year-old lever tells you that it's a 1 mass moving 4 velocity that equals a 4 mass going 1 velocity. So a device centuries old, okay, people risk their fortunes on this device, is telling you what equals what. What mass and what velocity are equal. A clear demonstration of the actual truth, and yet we're supposed to believe this because a guy just said so and never proved it. And then de Chardollet came along in the 1700s and did this silly goddamn clay experiments that fooled everybody because everybody's an idiot. They don't have any capacity to scrutinize anything. So she drops round objects and doesn't give them enough velocity to go into the clay. She just dents the clay. And you can obviously understand that the displacement is going to be larger than a demonstration of its energy, merely because the object gets bigger and bigger as you go deeper and deeper into it. And so it's going to push the clay sideways and create a bigger displacement. All right, so nobody should have been fooled by that. It's a nonlinear experiment. You're not going to get a linear proportional relationship unless you let the objects go into the clay. Then it's a fair fight. But if they're just denting the clay, the one that dents it a little bit is just a tiny surface. The one that's denting it is a bigger surface pushing clay. All right. Yeah, that's probably enough. I mean, you won't stay on the subject. You won't argue any of these particular points that you have no physical evidence. For 300 years, there was no good experiment. There just wasn't. It's just an absolute fact. Okay, they had a contest in France, around 1740 or whatever it was, to do something with this nonsense. And nobody showed up with. They showed up with thought experiments. They didn't show up with any real evidence. So again, just nonsense, just assertions made, convoluted. What if it's a boat and there's 15 people on this side of the boat and 4 people on this side of the boat, and then they're all, these are eating gummy bears and these are, I don't know, whistling Dixie, and the boat goes sideways, and that's all they did. Nonsense. So you call this good science? You've got this sewn up in some way where you can arrogantly pontificate and tell people they really should believe in this fable? This unproven, undemonstrated nonsense fable that did not land us on the moon, that would not land us on the moon. If they used mv squared, they would all have died, because it doesn't get right answers. The only thing that lifts the rocket off the ground is Newton's momentum, the equal and opposite reaction. You take a whole bunch of matter and you shoot it with a velocity down, and you get the opposite benefit of the opposite reaction that moves your spaceship. Kinetic energy didn't move the spaceship. You shot zillions of joules of energy down, and you didn't get zillions of joules going up. No, you got the equality of the momentum. Thrust is momentum. Thrust moves things in space. Kinetic energy has no clue how to move anything in space. It doesn't work. It isn't real. And it's absolutely preposterous. I mean, this is worse than, Galileo having to make jokes about, silly religious theories. About people denying, the sun can't possibly be the center of the solar system. Aren't you being just as belligerently obnoxious to the facts to sit there and cling to this moronic theory that this kinetic energy has some validity when it has for 300 years produced no decisive, decent evidence? Nothing. Zero. And Newton, who didn't believe in it and who did argue against it decidedly, you're pretending he invented it when he clearly stated to you, twice the force, twice the velocity, 3 times the force, 3 times the velocity. So, yes, that's all there is here. Okay, there's just obviously everyone who ends up on these videos apparently is some sort of dumbass, religious kook. Okay, who has no integrity and doesn't wish to argue reality. They just wish to dogmatically claim and dogmatically state what everyone must believe, or else we're going to call you names and just type bullshit constantly, evasions, nonsense, and not deal with any per second. This is ridiculous. that this is the state of things. I mean, really, there's so much detail in here, so much physics. Science requires a little bit of work, and you'd think people who have done the work, who understand that, okay, there's a lot of complications, a lot of variables, a lot of stuff to keep track of. I'm basically arguing, I can cut out a lot of that stuff, because the simple truth is that it is all the same thing, and all you're really talking about is the elemental stuff moving in the universe are the photons, the little bits, and the elemental matter is being motivated by the little bits. The little bits stick to the matter, move the matter, and so you can always follow where the little bits are, because they're either freely flying in the universe somewhere, or they're pushing matter. But yeah, people who have respect for science and they have no respect for the truth, because you've lost the argument. The amount of evidence against any notion that kinetic energy is real energy is decisive, because you can't point to any experiment where you actually conserve this crap, where this crap actually does work. And again, the rocket is the big example, right? In the debate, that moron, whatever his name is, sat there and argued that that's evidence of kinetic energy working, when it's clearly evidence of it not working. Because clearly, if you calculated the kinetic energy of the thrust at liftoff, you're not getting that into the rocket. Nowhere even close. The rocket barely moves. Okay? Because it's just the momentum. That's all you can move rockets with, is momentum. You have to expel mass at a velocity, period. No squared function, to move your mass at a velocity. All right. That's enough. Until the next time, and such and so forth and whatnot. But fuck, I just hate this planet of assholes.